Hi, everybody. This is Don Finn. I am the president of the Coalition on Adult Basic Education and also serve as the publications chair for COABE. It is my pleasure today to be joined by Carmine Stewart, who is one of the contributors to our latest edition here of the COABE Journal. And I'm just going to go ahead and pass it over to Carmine and say, why don't you introduce yourself to everybody?
Okay, thank you, Dr. Don. My name is Dr. Carmine Stewart, and I am the Vice President of Programming at Seeds of Literacy in Cleveland, Ohio. And I'm also the President and CEO of Aspire Consulting and Educational Services. And I do a lot of professional development in adult literacy education.
Great. Well, it's just a pleasure really to have you here today and to talk a little bit about your contribution to the COABE Journal, representation in adult literacy. We must do better. And this particular article really spoke to me because it is such a personal account, really, of the issues that we have been facing here in our country. And so, let me just ask you, right off the bat, why did you write this article for the COABE Journal?
First, I was so excited that COABE was focusing on race, diversity, equity, inclusion. That meant an awful lot to me because I feel like this is an important topic. Our field really does need to think about it. I believe that adult literacy work is social justice work. And if you can't really be effective as a social justice educator if you don't have that intersectional lens, if you don't understand that. But I also felt like if this conversation is going to happen, people like me, people who look like me, need to be a part of that conversation, if not helping to lead those conversations. So I definitely wanted to show support for COABE and for COABE showing attention to this topic. I thought it was really important to be a part of that.
Right. Well, we really appreciate that. And again, your article here is really a personal account. And again, it spoke to me. I had the pleasure of actually being one of the primary reviewers for your piece, and I was just so moved by it. And so let me just ask you. In having practitioners, administrators, and teachers reading your article, what do you hope that they will gain from this? What benefit will they gain from it? And subsequently, what benefit might their students gain from reading your piece?
Well, that's a great question. I hope that what they get from it is that whether you are explicit about your position on issues of equity and inclusion or not, you're communicating something. Your students, your staff, your volunteers, your board members, your funders, they're all listening to the messages that you're speaking, whether those messages are crafted and intentional or not. So I hope that what educators will take from it is, I hope that they'll have that moment of reflection where they'll think about their own practices and their own processes and their own board of directors and looking for that representation. I know that there's a funder in the Cleveland area who's been very outspoken about their commitment to race, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And they've gone so far as to put their grantees on notice that they're looking at board composition and they're looking at staff composition, and they're considering that as a factor in how they're awarding grant funding. I also think that it's important for our programs to reflect the real values of the folks that we serve. And the only way to get that is by having those voices be a part of the conversations when we're designing programs and when we're planning changes and when we're focusing on instruction and choosing curriculum. They should be at the table as a part of that conversation and give us real feedback on what they really need and what they really want. And I think sometimes when we're in a position, we're educators, and we feel like we know and understand what people need.
Right.
But honestly, sometimes what people need is for you to just ask what they need.
Right. Excellent. It's interesting too. So as the leadership came up and we talked about everything that's been going on in our society between the pandemic and just the light that has been shown on the racial injustices in so many communities, really across the country, we just felt like it was totally necessary to have this edition, to really have folks speak to this. And what's interesting, and one of the things that I noted actually in my welcome to this edition, was the whole idea, the whole concept of cultural humility. And I think, you really, what you hope people will gain from this piece is the ability to really, look at yourselves. And I think sometimes we simply don't know what we don't know. And, the whole idea of cultural humility is, it's really a lifelong process of self-reflection and self-critique. that we can learn about other cultures, that we can learn about other individuals. And so I really saw that in your piece here. So what recommendations would you have, if you can expand on that just even a little bit more, for the individual teacher in the classroom, for that administrator and so on?
I think it really has to be something that if you're committed to, or if you're trying to be committed to race, diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's something that has to be throughout your entire organization. I mean, it's great if a classroom teacher can use materials that are a little bit more inclusive. It's great if a teacher can look at an article and ask students to think critically about what perspectives are included and what perspectives and voices are excluded, and to think about how those students would how that different perspective might react to the same story. I think it's great if that can happen, but if it's not happening throughout the entire organization, those efforts tend to fall flat and fizzle out. So I
Gotcha.
think it has to be in a commitment from the entire organization. Obviously, in the nonprofit sector, things start from the top and work their way down. So it has to be their leadership that's committed to seeing the value in it and seeing how different perspectives make something better. I mean, if you think about, you talked about the American culture. Think about how wonderful American culture is because it's flavored with all of these different perspectives and influences and cultures and even languages. So I think it has to start from the top and then work its way through. And that recognition that the diversity makes us better, makes us stronger, makes us more robust, more inclusive. That once the leadership sees that, then it'll trickle down throughout the rest of the organization, because they will support those efforts throughout the rest of the organization, which almost makes you say that it needs to be a funder driven
Mm,
initiative, because when funders speak, we all listen. They're the
yeah.
E.F. Hutton of the nonprofit world, right? So I think that trying to be inclusive in terms of who we have on staff, who our volunteers are, and looking at how our materials are represented. And I also think it's important to talk about, we talk about race, diversity, equity, and inclusion, but we don't always think about the fact that class is also a huge factor in adult literacy,
Mhm.
because what's true for the most part is those of us who are teachers and administrators in adult literacy have not experienced the level of poverty that our students have experienced. And that, I think, is the larger cultural gap that's harder to bridge. And I think that that's something that we can all learn to overcome by bringing those voices into the room and trying to understand what those experiences are. I definitely do think that educators themselves have a role, having conversations about race, diversity, equity, and inclusion, talking to students about the things that come up in the news and how they can respond to it. What are some healthy ways to respond? Some productive ways, some ways that we can incorporate into literacy. So maybe we as a class decide to write letters to the editor about how we feel about what's happened and how it's impacting us.
Right.
So I think that there are lots of things that we can do, but I think the beginning of it is just what you said, having the humility to say, how might my perception of this be off? And what
Right.
other perceptions exist? And being open to the fact that we don't know everything and we're not going to share every perspective, and being open to understanding that the way you see something may not be the way I see it, but the way you see it is real and valid as a part of your experience. And that our exchange of ideas, a true exchange of ideas, will make us both have a broader perspective.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that perspective, Carmen. I think that oftentimes when we have not had the opportunity to view through a different lens and from a different perspective, it doesn't make us bad people. We're limited, I think, in our experiences and so on. But I can definitely say, and I firmly believe that a piece like yours and really this whole edition hopefully is going to open a lot of eyes across the country and across adult education. So let me ask you, do you have any additional comments? Anything else you'd like to share?
Well, just from your comment, I think that part of the reason that these conversations stall is because we make it about good people versus bad people. And it really isn't about good people and bad people for the most part. Some of the people that I've met in my life who have been admittedly the most racist and were just kind of reformed were people who didn't have exposure and experience with people outside of their race. And so when they did have those experiences, they started to see at least this person as being better, and if this person can be better, maybe other people are also okay. And so I think that that's part of it, is that we have to step away from that thinking that someone is if someone has a biased view, they're bad. We all have biased views, we
Mhm.
all have prejudices, we all act in discriminatory ways. but we're all existing in a racist system that none of us created, but where some of us benefit from it more than others, where some of us are oppressed by it, where others are not. And so to me, we have to move away from that dichotomy of good versus evil, because what's true is most folks who do things, most of what I experience personally in terms of acts, even what I spoke about in the article, I don't think that they were people who are intentionally trying to be harmful. I think there are people who just don't have the level of awareness. And so they're responding out of what they know and understand. But I think really to do this work, we have to get to the point where we really are working to understand our students' experiences and perspectives in a real way. Because if we're going to serve them appropriately, we have to have that broader perspective.
Right, definitely. Carmen, thank you so much. I really appreciate those words, and it really resonates so much. I'm just really excited for folks to read your article, and ultimately, at the heart of what we do here at COABE and what our mission is to inspire educators so adults succeed and communities thrive. And I think through contributions like yours, through discussions like this, they only add, and can only have a positive impact really on helping COABE to reach those goals. So I really sincerely appreciate your contribution, and thank you for your time, and thank you for taking time to speak to our membership.
Thank you. And thank you to COABE for creating this edition.